lightning shoots from my eyes. The impossible amount of damage I could cause. Iron blade.
Welcome back, y'all. Welcome to another Golden Record track breakdown, and today we are going to be talking about our third poetry track off of the album, which is Anger, featuring Galindo, of course. And in this track, we've got a lot of really interesting sound design happening, as well as we're going to break down a little bit about how the recording process for the poems took place. So let's go ahead and dive on into Ableton and see what's happening under the hood, shall we? So as we get into Ableton, something that you'll be able to pick up on pretty quickly is that there are a lot less instrumental tracks in this one than there are in the other songs on the album, or even some of the other poetry tracks off of the album. And that's because this song went through probably 4 or 5 different variations before we settled on this final one that appeared on the album. And some of those earlier versions were way more musically influenced. There was a lot of, guitars and kind of drum and bass vibes in there. And ultimately, the problem I had with those is they felt a bit predictable. And to me, Anger is just the opposite. More often than not, it leads you down paths you wouldn't go on otherwise, for better or for worse. And so I really wanted to impart that into the track, and having these more musical, melodic elements, it wasn't doing that. It felt a bit too predictable, and I was getting ahead of the joke, as we've sort of talked about in some of the other breakdowns as well. And so because of that, there's really not too many elements in this. A lot of what you're hearing are all of these glitches and things, which we'll get to in a minute, but primarily it's the poem and the storm and this tape loop. And this tape loop is probably our most melodic element, but it's more of a tone than a melody or anything in general. So we'll dig into that a bit more first. But first, let's just open up this poetry and this storm, because the initial idea for this track, one of the very first ideas, was, to me, Anger is a storm. So I was like, all right, let's take that idea. And so we were going to just have the poetry, and then interspersed throughout the poetry, there was going to be this huge storm churning the entire time, almost like maybe the poem was conjuring it in a way. And as I started going through and building things, I found that, it was leaving me wanting a little more, and that's where all the glitchiness comes in from. But I still really like how the storm exists with the poem. So we're just going to listen to some of these things on their own. Something I want to point out, again, I talked about in Driving in the Rain and 32nd Street, really anytime you're trying to create an environmental atmosphere, you have to have multiple versions of sounds. Nature is very much not going to repeat the same sound twice. I talked about it in my big spiel about sound designers and things in the other video, so I won't go down that rabbit hole again. But ultimately, I just wanted to show you that I'm not talking it out of my ass. You have to build these out every time. Now, the rain, this is easy to do. This is actually just one sound file that I really liked, but it was a bit too short for me. And so what there's happening is they're just crossfading from one version of the track to the other. But when you're listening to it, it's almost impossible to discern that. So I'll let you just sort of see if you can figure it out for yourself. I mean, you can, if you're really listening for it, you can kind of hear the fade out and the fade in, but in everything else going on with the track, you really can't tell. And especially when you bring in the thunder in addition to the rain, I mean, it's basically impossible. It's all together. It all creates one big atmosphere, and they all have, similar kinds of EQings and things on them, and that's just to create that cohesion and, really make it sound like the same storm in the same area. Then when you bring all of that in with the poetry, it just on their own, I love the way that they sound.
Red lightning shoots from my eyes. The impossible amount of damage I could cause. Iron blades forged in the white-hot flames of rage that churn my guts and explode upward through my voice box and my fist.
You can kind of hear how the thunder is coming in and out around his words and with sort of the things he was talking about. And again, that's just going back to that initial idea of the song just being poem and thunder. Now, as I said, I kind of found out pretty quickly that I wanted a bit more, especially with, we still needed to have some of the spaciness, some of the sci-fi elements present in this track. So honestly, this goes back to all the way at the top of the album with Greetings. If you remember, we talked about some of those glitchiness, some of the extra sound design in there being what could be someone listening to the golden record, finding the golden record after it's been floating through the space for millions of years, and because of that, it's not going to be perfect quality audio. And so I really liked this idea that maybe even Anger was kind of a buried track in the golden record, and so they really had to pull this out of the depths of the record and find sort of this, all the glitchiness and all of the audio artifacts that are present in it. So with that being said, let's go ahead and start talking about this tape loop. This tape loop, like I said, is probably our most melodic element throughout the whole thing. But again, it's really just adding more so a texture, something that adds a pressure, a sense of discomfort. There's an unease that comes with this tone. And the fact that it's just quietly there the entire time, I think adds some of that. You know, there's a discomfort, an uneasiness that comes from being really angry when you're in your like prime anger. And so I just, that's what this was. It added that discomfort, that kind of uneasiness you feel in your gut when you're really angry. And then the rest of the track is all of these glitches and things. Now, unfortunately, I don't have the time, neither do you, for me to go through and break down each of these glitches individually. So we're just going to sort of highlight some of them and kind of how they interact together with the poem and the storm. So a lot of these have been harvested through the Isotope sample library, freesound.org, just places like that. A lot of free samples that I could get my hands on and just destroy. We threw a lot of them through the Isotope trash plugin that we've talked about in some of the other episodes, and really like the whole point of these were to sort of mimic the tones, mimic the things that are being said in the poem. So I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of mute the storm and the tape loop and everything so that all you're hearing is the poem and these kind of glitchiness, and we'll just sort of hop around through some of these and talk about what they're doing.
Red lightning shoots from my eyes. The impossible amount of damage I could cause. Iron blades forged in the white-hot flames of rage that churn my guts and explode upward through my voice box and my fist.
So really what I was doing here was trying to really listen to his words and make these sounds blend around it. So as he's talking about like his voice box, you kind of get that weird sort of
explode upward through my voice box.
That little, you know, it kind of sounds like a person, a voice box. And so that was the key through this whole thing. You know, I come from a theatrical sound design background. You know, I went to school for acting at U of H. So theater and theatricalities, that's my bread and butter. Telling stories through sound, easy peasy for me. And so a lot of this is just go to your words. When I went back to my sound design training, and I was like, all right, let's look at the script as it were, and we're just going to find sounds that are supported by that. So any glitch, anything that you hear in there, there's a specific reason that I went for those kinds of sounds. Now, some of them are things that are going to be more synced up with like his syllables. For example, you can hear that happening here.
Year after year until the decades begin crumbling underneath.
And it's really synced up. You know, I went in and like really just sort of lined these up with the syllables to make sure that the sounds came in and reflected and added to his voice. I never wanted any of the glitches or anything to be the main star. The focus of this is the poetry and the words, and these are supplementary things that are coming in and adding ear candy and just sort of beefing up our whole final product. So like, for example, we've got these twinkling noises that are talking when he's talking about blasting the white doves of peace out of the sky with his pistol grip pump 12 gauge tongue, which is easily some of my favorite words he's ever strung together. So we'll just listen to that section.
Olive branches and blast the white doves of peace out of the sky with my pistol grip pump 12 gauge tongue.
And see, each sound helps to really hit that 12 gauge tongue. You get a punctuation with it that you wouldn't necessarily get if it was just the poetry track on its own. And then that twinkling, you could almost see the doves falling out of the sky, maybe in kind of a glitchy, almost Matrix-esque manner. All of these things together, it's what helps sell the story. Even things like this sputter bass. So as we go through and he starts listing off all of these words, each word is a thing he hates. You can hear this bass building up underneath it quietly. It's auto panned, so it's all about textures and tension creation. So let's listen to some of that happening in there. We'll go into this section.
True justice. The ages of belittling, condescension, racism, derision, malfeasance, indoctrination, corporal punishment, calumny, slander, bigotry, jealousy, hatred, mockery, gaslighting, lies, deception.
And so there are times where the sounds are very similar. There are times where you can kind of hear a shift out of one sound tone into others. And again, I'm just trying to doing my best to follow his words. Some of these things in here, especially like with all of this happening, like this that sputter bass to add the tension, it's all just about layering more and more of that on top of each other. So we'll break down some of these glitches, especially right at the top of this. You can see by the naming that these are actually the same sound file multiple times in a row.
The ages of belittling, condescension, racism.
So they I wanted similar sounds, but because I did want them to be their own unique one each time, if you go into the clip and mess with the transposition, you can tell that each one of these has a bit of something different going on in there. And this one especially so, and it just creates these really interesting kinds of variations to the same sound file. It's just going, and because I have it set to beats, it's not following the tones dramatically. If you switch this over to tones, you can hear it sounds a bit different. You really hear the variation in the tone more. I switch it back to beats and it locks more of the tempo effect in there and less of what the tone is doing. And that was enough for me. I didn't need it to be fully focused on tone. I thought, just having some of that glitchiness and more so sticking with the rhythmic nature of it was a bit more important for me there, which is why we ended up with that. But that is a lot of what you're hearing throughout the entirety of this track, is a lot of the same kinds of sounds just being affected and reworked in a different way. So even like our sort of final, we've got these big kinds of, we'll go into the storm here. We have this thunder strike, and this is sort of the final big crunchy effect that takes us out of the song into propulsion. And it's just a thunder strike that has been reversed. So we're just going to solo this so you can hear it on its own. Hear it building. I just thought it was a really cool way. We've had all of this thunder environmental stuff throughout the entire song, but taking some of that and affecting it, glitching it in a way. So I'm kind of like with hurricane season, we took a lot of the sounds of like the river and sort of bird noises, and we made them a bit more percussive, a bit more of an instrumental effect. Well, since most of this whole track is kind of glitchy effects, having this reversed thunder hit really helps to bring in the idea of the thunderstorm, the storm of anger that's there the whole time, and it brings it into the world of all of these glitches and everything. So you can hear these final moments as they everything comes together. We'll go ahead and just bring all of this in, make sure everything is turned on. All right. And just kind of listen to how all of this, the poem, the thunder, the rain, all of these glitches come together in this final moment, and then leaves us with just this big hit of the poetry. Again, the whole focus of this one has been the poem, so I thought it made the most sense to strip everything away for that very last word. So we'll just listen to this last phrase real quick.
And skullduggery. I will come at you with this load of punishment, and you won't be able to do anything to stop me. 8-ball in the side pocket, motherfucker. A blast of smoke and poof! You are gone!
And then it just rings out. We really left with the full sort of weight of Louis's voice there, and I think it makes for quite a wonderful sort of slimmed down moment, as we've talked about with tracks before. You know, this is kind of a drop in a way. We're going out of some big heavy noise and into more heavy noise. So the best way to make that as impactful as possible is take away as much as you can, leave yourself with as little as you can to have in there, and then when you come back in hitting hard with another sound, it's that much more effective, which is why we're just left with nothing but Louis right here at the end.
You are gone!
So that was Anger featuring Mr. Louis Galindo, and man, he just knocked it out of the park on all of these tracks. We got one more poetry track with him coming up in a few days, my personal favorite one off of the entire album. It's called Happiness, so I can't wait to dive into that. On this next track breakdown, though, we're going to be focusing on Propulsion, which is easily one of the largest scoped songs of the entire album. I can't wait to talk about the mixing process with that and how I dealt with the orchestra. But until then, keep it locked in here, keep listening to the album and sharing it with your friends, and I'll catch y'all on the next one.
Infidelity, injury, dejection, ridicule, and skullduggery. I will come at you with this load of punishment, and you won't be able to do anything to stop me. 8-ball in the side pocket, motherfucker. A blast of smoke and poof. You are gone.